Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. So continuing from our previous discussion, one of the things that we mentioned was that the greatest deception of our modern time, and something that affects all religions, not just Islam, even Christianity, which has a lot of similarities to Islam and is the most populous religion here in the United States of America, is grappling with this problem as well, and that is the idea that faith and fact are not the same thing. In Islam, religious knowledge is divided into three categories, which you guys are very well aware of. We have beliefs, we have laws, and we have ethics. So whatever the religious teaching and knowledge is, it's going to fall into one of these categories. Either it's something we believe in, or it's something that we do, like an act of worship, or there's laws that govern our everyday lives, like family life and economics and inheritance and so on. Or the Islamic teaching will govern ethics. When my emotions are good, when it's good to hate, when it's good to love something, when it's okay to be greedy, like greedy for knowledge, not greedy for somebody else's belongings and so on. When it comes to the laws of Islam, we can either become jurists ourselves, you can become a mujtahid yourself and determine what the Islamic laws are, or you follow the rulings of a jurist, which is called taqlid. That is the method we follow when it comes to Islamic law. But when it comes to the primary beliefs of Islam, the foundational beliefs of the religion, here Islam demands reasoning and individual research. Islam says that your beliefs cannot be accepted through culture. They cannot be accepted as an inheritance. They cannot be accepted on someone else's authority. And they cannot be based on emotional experience. I cannot say Allah exists just because Ayatollah Sistani says Allah exists. There's no taqlid here. Taqlid is wrong here. I have to decide for myself. And Islam's primary texts are the Quran and the Sunnah. Of course, you know the Quran is the revelation from God, the Sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and the Imams of Ahlul Bayt alayhim wassalam. And the Prophet and his family, we say they're ma'soom, so their words and their actions are guidance, and their example is supposed to be imitated by. So the Quran and the Sunnah, even though they do tell us what to believe, they also provide the reasons for that belief. So for example, the Quran says that we should believe in one God, but it also gives us the reasoning. For example, it says, لَوْ كَانَ فِيهِمَا آلِهَةٌ إِلَّا اللَّهُ لَفَسَدَتَا. Chapter 20 in Surah Al-Anbiya, chapter 21, verse 22. Allah says, if there had been any gods in them, meaning in the heavens and the earth, except Allah, they would both have certainly been in chaos. Very briefly, very succinctly, and eloquently explaining the concept that if there had been more than one God, they would both fall into chaos, fighting each other, disagreeing, and so forth. Who do we worship? Who creates? Who's right? Who's wrong? And so on. We'll discuss this later as well, but this is the basis for that. Or Islam asks us to believe in prophets. But Islam also gives us the reasoning. Why do we believe in prophets? An atheist asked Imam Sadiq alayhi salam about the logic of sending prophets. And the Imam alayhi salam, he said that when we have agreed that we have a creator, we understand that the creator is wise and he only does what is beneficial, then it's necessary to send prophets and messengers to communicate his laws to the people. So basically he's saying, when we understand there's a creator, then we understand that he is just and he is wise. This is why we also believe in justice as a foundation of the religion. And it is based on Allah's justice that he will send these prophets and messengers. He's not going to leave us in the dark. He's not going to leave us wandering around in ignorance and confusion. He's going to send us these guides from among ourselves that we can trust and relate to and imitate. So when Islam asks us to do something, to believe in something, whether it's in the Quran or the narrations, the reasoning for it, when it comes to the primary beliefs, the reasoning is there. So reasoning, we say, brings us to monotheism. And all of the other beliefs in Islam are derived from monotheism, and all worship is intended with the intention of preserving that monotheism, whether it's the prayer and the fasting or any of these, the dua, All of it is for the intention of preserving monotheism. And monotheism means that Allah is the only object of worship. He is the only creator, He is the only sustainer, and He is the only source of harm or benefit. This is clear definition of monotheism. There's no similarity between Allah and His creation. Allah is independent while everything else is dependent on Him. Allah's attributes are absolute while the attributes of everything else are temporary and limited and given to them by Allah. They do not own anything of themselves except what Allah gives to them. Allah says, قُلْ, say, أَتَعْبُدُونَ مِن دُونِ اللَّهِ مَا لَا يَمْلِكُ لَكُمْ ضَرًّا وَلَا نَفْعًا. Surah Al-Ma'idah, chapter 5, verse 76, Allah says, say, do you worship besides Allah that which does not control for you any harm nor any benefit? So, when something performs an action, whether it's something living, like an animal or a human being, or inanimate, like the motion of the heavens and the earth, when something acts, Allah is allowing it to perform that action. And if we praise somebody, if we praise something, we're only praising that person as a medium of God's benefit. We're not praising to say, oh, you had this power and greatness of yourself and you gave it to me. We're saying that Allah allowed you to do that, and you were the medium of Allah's mercy and compassion. When prophets perform miracles, it's by the permission of Allah. Doctors cure patients using the knowledge and ability provided by God. Scientists, when they discover laws of science, does a scientist write these laws? No. They discover them. And who is the author of these laws, as we said, is Allah. So even scientists, the greatest ones who write these books of science, they do not create, they do not author, they do not write any of these laws. They're simply, basically just archaeologists. Like an archaeologist will dig up a site from thousands of years ago and find a tablet with laws written on it, and these are laws governing a society. A scientist is doing the same thing. They're archaeologists finding the book of natural law that is already written in the universe, written by God. So in our day, as we said, the greatest challenge to religion and belief comes from the materialists and the atheists. The materialists consider God and religion outside of the realm of truth and reality. What they say is that sensory experience is the source of all human knowledge. What we can know through our senses: touch, taste, hearing, smelling, and hearing? Did I forget one? There's 5, right? Sight. Seeing, hearing, touching, tasting, and I forgot one again. Anyway, smelling. There we go. There's 5 in there somewhere. So, materialism, materialists don't accept religion, they don't accept God, they don't accept anything supernatural because they say that these things cannot be established through sensory experience. But we say that materialism is a self-contradictory and self-defeating principle. Why? Because materialism and the materialists, they make this claim. They claim that all knowledge must be gained through the senses and through experimentation, through the scientific method. So, if this, in quotes, materialism is a truth, then materialism, quote unquote, must be understood through the senses or experimentation. Correct? Because they're making a statement of fact. And this statement of fact, according to its own definition, must be the result of some type of physical observation, some sort of sensory experience, some sort of truth learned through experimentation. But materialism, this truth of materialism that they claim, is not understood through the senses or through experimentation. So by its own definition, materialism is a false statement that cannot be proven, cannot be known, it cannot be truth or reality. Likewise, none of the universally accepted self-evident truths that we mentioned earlier, none of them can be experienced through the senses. The reality is that reasoning and revelation, they are valid sources of knowledge, and they are greater sources of knowledge than what we can learn from science. If we were to categorize the ways that we learn, the ways that we gain knowledge, it's in several ways. One is we have instinctive knowledge, knowledge that is naturally already within us. The other way is through rational deduction. We use reasoning. We look at the world around us, we take the evidence that we find, and we make judgments and conclusions based on that evidence. This is reasoning. The other is discovery. We learn certain things by physically finding them in the world around us, and the last and the greatest way that we gain knowledge is through revelation. So combining all of these sources gives us a more complete set of truths. But the knowledge acquired through discovery may always be incomplete, meaning the knowledge that we gain through scientific discovery. It may always be incomplete, such as knowledge of history, historical knowledge, scientific knowledge. This is never complete and this is never absolute. The only knowledge that we gain that is absolute, that is complete, is the non-physical knowledge that we gain, or the judgments that we make, the supernatural judgments that we make from the physical evidence that we gather. So we say that scientific knowledge or the empirical knowledge is incomplete. And someone may ask, why? Why is it that we say that scientific knowledge is incomplete? Well, materialists, they argue the following. They say we can only know something as a fact, as reality, as a truth, if it can be known empirically through science. God cannot be known empirically, therefore God is not a truth, a fact, a reality. So this is the syllogism that they use. This is the progression that they use. Truth is only physical, God is not physical, therefore God is not truth. This is the reasoning they have. So now we have to ask ourselves, well, what is this science that everybody keeps talking about? We use this word science as if it's something sacred, as if it's something that everybody already agrees on, but maybe we're using the word in two different ways. Maybe science isn't really what we think it is, or maybe it isn't what they think it is. So let's look at it. What is science? Science is the study of the material physical world. And what happens in the scientific method? A question or a hypothesis is proposed. Empirical information is collected from the natural world, either through observation or through experimentation, and then a conclusion is made based on the empirical information, correct? Hypothesis, gather through observation, experimentation, and then make a conclusion. And then that can be repeated over and over. The empirical information, what we call empirical, is what can be known through our senses that we mentioned, those 5 senses. And this also includes measurements, the size, the weight, heat, speed, mass, volume, all of these different variables and factors that go into science. These are all empirical. But the scientific method itself is not something physical. The scientific method is an idea, and ideas are produced by reasoning. So although some parts of the scientific method are empirical, the scientific method itself is not physical, and it is produced by reasoning. So reasoning has produced the scientific method, but science did not produce reasoning. So we say that yes, it is true that God cannot be known by the 5 senses, and that God cannot be measured by any instrument or be tested through any experiment. So yes, it is true that empirical research does not apply to God himself. But we are able to know things about God through reasoning, as we will see later. Unlike materialists, we say that something is true if it is proven by reasoning. And reasoning, as we said, is our ability to think and make judgments. So science is a component of reasoning. Science does not encompass reasoning. Reasoning encompasses science. Science is just one of the ways that reasoning is able to give us truth. And reasoning goes beyond the material, where science is not able to go. For example, experiments give us that empirical information. We observe certain things, we measure certain things, we collect that data. But the empirical data that we gather only covers a particular time and a particular place. The data does not make judgments. The data does not make conclusions. It is our reasoning that goes beyond that data to make those judgments and conclusions. So science cannot give us what we call absolute knowledge, because it cannot experiment all aspects of all creation. You see, sometimes we make statements that cover everything. We make these absolute judgments. But science cannot give us those. Or at least we say empirical data cannot give us those judgments because it only covers a specific time, a specific place. For example, we ask the question, did the world have a beginning? Will the world have an end? Is the universe infinite? Can science answer these questions? No, science cannot answer these questions. Why? Well, we can't travel in time. So the beginning and end of the world cannot be observed because science is supposed to be through observation. So the beginning and end of the world are beyond science. Can we test if the universe is infinite? Well, no, because infinity is something that we can never reach. So by definition, science can't reach it. So these legitimate questions are beyond science. Scientific data is limited. It's not comprehensive. So for example, let's say we're talking about surveys. You know, people do surveys all the time. A survey gathers information from a small number of people, and then that limited data is extrapolated to make a conclusion and judgment about the entire population. The data gathering is empirical, but the extrapolation and that judgment is not empirical, even though they include all of that in science. So when we're talking about science, we have to be able to parse these separate parts of the scientific method. Some parts of it are empirical and physical, some parts of it are not. The rest is philosophical. Another limitation of science. For example, science cannot demonstrate what we call impossibilities. Science cannot demonstrate impossibilities. For example, if I were to ask you, I say, brother, please, can you draw for me a triangle that has 4 sides? Please draw for me a 4-sided triangle, sister. You might say that this is impossible. But can we scientifically demonstrate that it's impossible to draw a 4-sided triangle? You see, we make this comprehensive statement. It is impossible to draw a 4-sided triangle. This is an absolute statement. But can we scientifically demonstrate this? Okay, we do some experiments. We get some people together, give them paper and pencil, pen, whatever writing utensil, say, draw a 4-sided triangle. We're going to do these trials. An experiment can show that an attempt at drawing a 4-sided triangle ends in failure. But experimentation cannot demonstrate that nobody in the future will be able to draw one, right? Well, how do we know? Maybe somebody in the future can do it, but we just haven't seen it yet. Maybe somebody in the past did it and nobody found out about it. So science cannot scientifically or empirically demonstrate the impossibility of drawing a 4-sided triangle. What can it show us? All it can show us is that in those trials that we attempted, we were not capable of doing it. So that's all we can say. That in those trials that we performed, we were not able to do it. Yes? Exactly. The empirical part is relating the data, right? So we did 100 experiments. In those 100 experiments, we failed in drawing a 4-sided triangle. That's where empirical data ends. Now, if I take that and make a probabilistic conclusion, that's not science anymore. Well, it's not an observation anymore. It's reasoning. I'm extrapolating it beyond the physical. Now I'm making a supernatural conclusion. I'm making a prediction that I have not observed about the future, about something that is beyond what the experiment was able to cover. You see? So we know it's an impossibility, but we did not learn this from science. It's an impossibility because reasoning determines that it's a self-contradiction. You see? The definition of a triangle is what? Has 3 sides. So as soon as I say, give me something with 4 sides, it wouldn't be a triangle anymore. So a 4-sided triangle is a self-contradiction, and therefore it's an impossibility. So reasoning makes this claim without the need for any experimentation or any science whatsoever. Therefore, science is not necessary to establish all truths. Not only can it not establish all truths, it is not necessary to establish all truths. Even mathematics, which we know as the most pure, the most certain science, this still itself is not experimental. And many concepts in math cannot be physically demonstrated. I mean, we have concepts in math. For example, just something as simple as a circle. What is a circle? A circle is a shape where all the distances from the center to the perimeter are exactly the same. but we can't physically demonstrate this. Let's say even if I take a protractor and I draw a circle, can I actually physically demonstrate? If I go down to the minutest of measurements, I'll see that all of those points are at least a little bit different from each other, and none of them will be exactly the same. Pi, for example, is something which is so far we have been unable to demonstrate in the real world. As far as numerically, 3.14155692 all the way to thousands of numbers, we're not able to physically demonstrate this. So there are things that science, even mathematics, is not able to demonstrate. Science cannot define fundamental realities like time and space. And we're going to look at this a little bit later. You know, how many equations in physics and so forth use time and space as variables. But time and space cannot be even defined as to what they are. Time and space cannot be experienced by our senses. We don't know them by sensory experience, but they are integral foundations of science. So therefore, science cannot be the basis of any ideology or any type of permanent morality because it's always changing, and it cannot establish anything absolute like self-evident truths. Another problem that we have when we're talking about science is, how do we ever know that there's enough data? No matter how many experiments are conducted, each one of those experiments is anecdotal. So the sum of all of the experiments is the sum of anecdotal evidence, correct? If I perform one experiment, someone says, oh, that was just one experiment, that's one trial, that's an anecdote. So they say, well, you need to have a certain number. Well, how did you decide what that certain number is? The challenge for science is showing that a certain number of trials is now a sufficient basis for establishing a comprehensive law. So why is it invalid to extrapolate the results of 5 experiments, but it's okay to extrapolate the results of 100 experiments? I could say, well, that's not enough, I need 1,000, right? So who has the authority to decide what enough experiments have been conducted? Now, we're not saying that this is wrong. What we're saying is that this is outside the realm of science. It's not science that determines when we have conducted enough trials. It's reasoning that determines when we have conducted enough trials. Another simple example that our other students here have already heard from me, take water. If we heat water, and we heat it to 100 degrees Celsius under normal conditions, what's going to happen? The water's going to boil under normal conditions, right? So what does the data tell us? The data tells us that in that one trial that we performed, the water boiled at 100 degrees Celsius. If we repeat this trial 1,000 times, and in every trial the water boiled at 100 degrees Celsius, what does the data tell us? Some people will say, it tells us that there's a comprehensive absolute rule that under similar conditions, water will always boil at 100 degrees Celsius. No, the data did not tell us that. The data told us that in those 1,000 trials, the water boiled at 100 degrees Celsius. The conclusion that water will always boil in the future at 100 degrees Celsius is made by reasoning. And the conclusion that water will always boil at 100 degrees Celsius, this now goes beyond the data. It goes beyond the empirical information. In order for this conclusion to be empirical, we would have to perform an infinite number of trials, always and always be boiling water to continuously say that yes, it's still boiling at 100 degrees Celsius. So these are the limits of science. So now we're talking about space and time. We say, what is space? Right? Every piece of empirical data is an approximation. So if you were to take, if I had a board here, I would show you. Next time I'll show us on the board. It'll be a little easier to demonstrate. For a point in space, think of a point in space. You know what we're talking about, a point in space, right? A point in space is a conceptual reality that cannot be demonstrated as a physical reality. Think of, a graph. Everybody's done graphs here. Either you have a two-dimensional graph with the x and y axis, or you can even do three-dimensional with x, y, and z axis. So let's take it simply, the x and y axis. Let's say at the point 1, 1. x1, y1. There's a point. Does that point exist? It has coordinates. It's a point in space, but it cannot be physically demonstrated. If I say put a dot there, is that dot, you take a pen, you draw a tiny dot, is that really 1, 1? You take the dot and you zoom in on it. No, it was actually 0.9999 to 1.00001. Now let's say we zoom in even further. No matter how far you keep magnifying and zooming in, you will never get to a point where you can say this is only 1, 1. It's always going to cover some range. So that point in space that we're talking about, the coordinate 1, 1, is a conceptual reality that cannot be demonstrated physically. So now, it can't be seen or measured because it doesn't have a range or a measurement of its own. It has coordinates that point to its location, but it itself does not take up any space. So now we ask these questions. If it doesn't have any range in space, does it physically exist? If it doesn't physically exist, then this would mean that all measurements in space are between points that have no physical existence of their own. If existence now must be physically tangible, then points in space don't exist, and if none of the points exist, if none of the points in space exist, does the space itself actually exist? If the space doesn't exist, then what is it that we are measuring by length, width, height, distance, speed, velocity, acceleration? What are we measuring now if space doesn't exist? You see, if we realize this, we reach the conclusion that if we restrict reality to the limits of empirical discovery, science would not be possible. The only way science is possible is if we accept the reality of reasoning and that there's something beyond empirical data, something beyond the natural. If we stick to empirical discovery and data only, science itself would not be possible. So that's just some questions about space. Of course, we know space exists. We take it as a self-evident truth, even though we're not able to demonstrate it physically or maybe even give a definition for it, which we're going to talk about now when it comes to time. What is time? The foundations of science, such as time and space, they can't be described in words. So if you were to look at any dictionary, and I challenge anyone to do this, pick up any dictionary, you'll see that time is defined by words that are themselves defined by assuming a meaning for time. Okay, so for example, you pick up a dictionary, it says, time is the system of those sequential relations that any event has to any other as past, present, or future. So now time is described by the word sequence, past, present, future. Now go and look up past, present, and future. Past, gone or elapsed in time. Present, being, existing, or occurring at this time or now. Future, time that is to be or to come hereafter. In order for past, present, and future to have any meaning themselves, they must assume a meaning for time. But then how is time defined? By these words that assume a time for meaning itself. It becomes a circular type of definition. It doesn't give you anything. The only way that we can understand time is to just accept it, because that's how Allah created us. He put that instinctive knowledge of time within us. We live by it, even if we don't think about it. So this cannot be explained by science. It cannot be physically demonstrated, but it is a reality. Time and space are the foundations of science, even though they cannot be detected by our senses. So if we can only call something truth, fact, or reality if it can be known empirically, then time and space cannot be known empirically. Therefore, time and space are not realities. Science is based on time and space. Therefore, science is not a valid method for determining reality. And then the materialist argument invalidates itself. So, time and space, as we said, are self-evident truths. They're realities. They must exist in order for our world to make sense. Even if we're not scientists, we have to believe in time and space for the world to make sense. So they must exist not only for the world, but for science itself to also make sense. Next is that scientific truths are not materialistic. So what we call scientific truths or scientific facts are non-physical and conceptual. Scientific facts are philosophical truths that cannot be absolutely demonstrated in the physical world. So all real truth is non-physical. And if something isn't known through direct physical observation, then it is not empirical. So scientists, what do? They use reasoning to make up for the shortcomings of that physical data. So, to make a general conclusion, a scientist interprets the data using those self-evident concepts that are assumed, that we accept automatically, but have never been experimented. So science isn't valid because of itself. Science is only valid because reasoning says that science has value within a certain set of limitations. And what do we do in religion? In religion, we do the same thing that we do in science. Religion collects data, and then religion makes conclusions. Religion considers all of the data, physical, moral, philosophical, conceptual, but science only covers and only considers physical data. Therefore, religion is more scientific than science, because religion considers all of the data and all of the information, then makes its conclusions, whereas when we're talking about empirical discovery, it only talks about the material. So materialism is self-contradictory, it's self-defeating, because it restricts reality to the physical, while at the same time relying on non-physical self-evident truths. Reasoning interprets empirical data because we see that sometimes the information that we get is not really what we think it is. So there's a whole bunch of experiments that you can conduct yourself where you can see that somebody might see something, somebody might feel something, somebody might hear something, but what they're seeing and feeling and hearing is not really what's there. There's sensory adaptation tests, for example, which you guys have probably done. You take 3 bowls of water, one at 40 degrees, one at 70, one at 100. Put one hand in the 40, one hand in the 100 degrees for a minute, and then put them both in the middle bowl that has 70-degree water. The one that was in the 40 will think the 70-degree water is really hot, when in fact it's only at room temperature. And the hand that was in 100-degree water, when you put it in the 70-degree, it'll feel like it's freezing, but it's not freezing. It's just your senses are being deceived. So what is the conclusion that we draw from this? We use our reasoning to tell us that no, our hands are not simultaneously burning and freezing at the same time in the same water. It's just that they became adapted to the 2 extreme temperatures, and now they're feeling something which it's unaccustomed to, so it's feeling more extreme than the normal. So this is the conclusion that our reasoning makes, but it's not the conclusion that our senses are telling us. So the materialist argument, as we said, what was it that they present as fact? They say that we can only call something truth if it's known empirically. So which of the senses observed this truth? Did anybody ever see physically with their eyes? The truth can only be empirical. What experiment did they perform in order to arrive at this truth? Correct? Because they say that you have to, you have to experiment, you have to repeat the experiment, you have to have lots and lots of trials with a lot of peer review and a lot of controls. What experiment was ever performed to show that only empirical data gives us reality? So the materialist argument itself is not empirical, so by its own definition, it can't be reality. And there's lots of questions that science is not able to touch. Does God exist? What is good and what is evil? Does good and evil actually exist? Are some human beings more valuable than others? Is human equality something that is real? Can science answer this question? Can science establish the equality of all human beings? We say that without belief in God, without belief in religion, it is impossible to establish the humanity of all human beings. Is there a purpose to life? Is there a life after death? Where did we come from? These are very valid questions that form a person's identity. And we know that without a proper identity, a person can't have a healthy life. So we have to answer these questions, but all of these questions are beyond the realm of science. So we're going to see later on, inshallah, how reasoning and how religion answers these questions. Okay. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.